Hi everyone, my name is John Robert Bayhon from BTLED 1B. So now we are going to discuss Chapter 1, Communication Process, Principle, and Ethics. But before that, our learning outcome is to describe the nature, elements, and the functions of verbal and nonverbal communication in various and multicultural contexts. The communication process. The goal of communication is to convey information and the understanding of that information from one person or a group to another person or group. This communication process is divided into three basic components. A sender transmits a message through a channel to the receiver. Figure shows a more elaborate model. The sender first develops an idea which is composed into a message and transmitted to the other party who interprets the message and receives meaning. Information theorists have added somewhat more complicated language. Developing a message is known as encoding. Interpreting the message is referring to decoding. The other important feature is the feedback cycle. When two people interact, communication is rarely one way only. When a person receives a message, she responds to it by giving a reply. The feedback cycle is the same as sender-receiver feedback noted in figure. Otherwise, the sender can know whether the other parties properly interpreted the message or how they reacted to it. Feedback is especially significant in management because a supervisor has to know how subordinates respond to the directives and plans. The manager also needs to know how work is progressing and how employees feel about the general work situation. The critical factor in measuring the effectiveness of communication is common understanding. Effective communication, therefore, occurs when the intended message of the sender and the interpreted message of the receiver are one and the same. Although this should be the goal in any communication, it is not always achieved. The most efficient communication occurs at the minimum cost in terms of resources expended. Time, in particular, it is important resource in the communication process. For example, it would be virtually impossible for an instructor to take the time to communicate individually with each student in the class about every specific topic covered. However, efficient time-saving communication are not always effective. A low-cost approach such as an email note to distribution list may save time, but it does not always result in everyone getting the same meaning from the message. Sometimes communication is effective but not efficient.
The four primary principles in communication. Effective communication is a connection between people that allows for the exchange of thoughts, feelings, and ideas, and leads to mutual understanding. This exchange is evidenced when a speaker sends a message to which a listener responds. It seems simple but isn't. There are many factors that ultimately determine whether a particular communication experience is likely to be successful or not. There are internal factors that affect each person participating in the communication process individually, interactional factors that affect how information is sent and received between two or more people, and external factors that affect the extent to which the physical environment is conducive to effective communication. There are four primary principles of communication. First, the message sent is not necessarily the message received. Second, it is impossible to not communicate. Third, every message has both content and feeling. Fourth, nonverbal cues are more believable than verbal cues. The message sent may not be message received because it must pass through a filtering system of thoughts and feelings. for both the sender and the receiver. As a result, when an adult comes from home frustrated or angry about his or her work day, he or she may communicate anger or impatience to his or her partner or children. Even though that isn't his or her intent, the message must also pass through the listener's own filter of thoughts and feelings. If a partner or child expects the sender of the message to be angry or impatient, he or she may hear neutral or even positive statements as harsh or angry. There is considerable room for misunderstanding between what the speaker intends to say and what he or she actually says, and what the listener hears. The less conscious attention the speaker and or the listener is paying, the more distracted they are by internal or external stimuli. When the message is sent and the more emotional charged the subject is, the more likely it is that there will be a disconnect between what the speaker intends to say and what or he or she actually says and what the listener hears. Number two, it is impossible to not communicate. All actions, both intentional and unintentional, communicate certain messages. For example, deliberately ignoring someone is not communicating. Quite the contrary, as you know if you've been on the receiving end. This action sends a strong message. Moreover, verbal communication, the words used, is only part of the larger communication process that includes body language, facial expression, tone, voice, and voice volume. Number three, every message has both content and feeling. Every message contains of feeling and content is what the message is about based on the words used. The feeling connected to the content is expressed through the nonverbal cues, body language and gestures, facial expressions, tone of voice, inflection, and voice volume. Number 4. Nonverbal cues are more believable than verbal cues. Electronic communication via email, text, and other forms of instant messages can be so challenging and easily misinterpreted precisely because the words used are isolated from any and all the nonverbal cues that provide essential information and clarification.
Elements of communication. Human communication is interpersonal. It is a propulsive and it is a two-way process. More than a sender, speaker, listener, receiver needs other elements to be able to complete the process. Elements of communication. Number 1. Sender, also known as the speaker or encoder, it is the one who sends the oral or written message. Number 2, receiver, also known as the listener or decoder, is the one who listens and decodes the conveyed message. The receiver is also responsible for providing the feedback to the sender. Number 3, message is whatever the sender communicates to the receiver or information received by the receiver from the sender. Messages are ideas and feelings that make up the content of the process of communication. Number 4, channel is the medium or means through which the message is transmitted. Some familiar channels are radio, television, records, newspapers, magazines, in the mass media. Other channels communicate nonverbal messages through the use of human senses such as touching, smelling, and tasting. Number 5, noise is also known as the interference that keeps a message from being understood or accurately interpreted, such as physical, psychological, sociological, and semantic noise. Number 6, situation is the time and place in which communication occurs. Communication adapts to the setting. For example, the languages of students in the classroom are quite different from the language they use at home. Number 7, feedback is the message receivers send to the source in response to the sender's message. Feedback can be in the form of verbal or nonverbal response. General principles of effective communication. Know your purpose. Number 1, know your purpose in communicating. Number 2, know your audience. Number 3, know your topic. Number 4, adjust your speech or writing to the context of the situation. Number five, work on feedback given to you. Communication ethics. Communication ethics is about the goodness of communication interaction. Both are inseparable in all human interaction, from speaking to an older police officer, students, university president, and etc. Thus, ethical questions infuse all the areas of discipline, including rhetoric, media studies, intercultural, international communication, relational and organizational communication, etc. The National Communication Association Credo for Ethical Communication is one of the bases for the standard ethical communication. National Communication Association Credo for Ethical Communication, approved by the National Communication Association Legislative Council 1999. Questions of right and wrongs arise when people communicate. Ethical communication is fundamental to responsible thinking, decision-making, and the development of relationships and communities within the across contexts, cultures, channels, and media. Moreover, ethical communication enhances human worth and dignity by fostering truthfulness and fairness, responsibility, personal integrity, and respect for self and others. We believe that unethical communication threatens the quality of all communication and consequently the well-being of individuals and the society in which we live. Therefore, we, the members of the National Communication Association, endorse and are committed to practicing the following principles of ethical communication. We advocate truthfulness, accuracy, honesty, and reason as essential to the integrity of communication. We endorse freedom of expression, diversity of perspective, and tolerance of dissent to achieve the informed and responsible decision-making fundamental to a civil society. We strive to understand and respect the other communicators before evaluating and responding to their messages. We promote access to communication resources and opportunities as necessary to fulfill human potential and contribute to the well-being of families, communities, and society. We promote communication climate of caring and mutual understanding that respect the unique needs and characteristics of individual communicators. We condemn communication that degrades individuals and humanity through distortion, intimidation, concern, and violence, and through the expression of tolerance and hatred. We are committed to the courageous expression of personal convictions and pursuit of fairness and justice. We advocate sharing of information, opinions, and feelings when facing significant choices while also respecting privacy and confidentiality. We accept responsibility for short and long-term consequences for our own communication and expect the same of others.
Communicating with people from different cultures. The importance of culture. There are many definitions, but it would be fair to say that it is the acquired knowledge that people use to interpret, experience, and generate social behavior. In some cultures, a suit and a tie for men and a suit and a skirt for women may be appropriate business attire, while in other cultures, the business attire may be less formal. For some cultures, a business meeting with a superior will begin with introductory bows, and in other cultures, the meeting would begin with a handshake. Each culture has its own set of habits, values, and ways of interacting with others, and these differences between cultures frequently are the source of problems in intercultural communication. The, the communication process is a two-way street, with both the sender and receiver having an effect on what is communicated and how it is interpreted. This can involve both the external and internal flow of information, as well as verbal and nonverbal communication styles. Because culture affects so many aspects of people's life, people are frequently unaware of their own culture and how it differs from other cultures. In addition, most people have a tendency to assume that the values, behaviors, communication, and style of their own culture are what are normal or correct, and that the behaviors, values, and so on of the people from other cultures are strange and incorrect. This is called ethnocentrism and is a common attitude with people who have not been exposed to different cultures or whom are unwilling to accept the benefits and diversity. An important barrier to intercultural communication is language. Even though people from other cultures may speak English, may not be your English. That is because even the language people speak from other English-speaking cultures, such as Great Britain, has some important differences from the English spoken in the United States, and these differences can create miscommunication and misunderstanding. Example that illustrate how simple expression can be utterly confusing to some. Your friendly new British colleague you met in the corridor make a comment you look literally. They said you should come over for a coffee sometime. Sounds like an invite. Yes? Actually, no, as they would most likely be very surprised if you turned up their doorstep. However, to understand such thing, you need to look behind the spoken words. Your friendly British colleague was just being polite. Let's do something sometime is merely an English expression bearing as much weight and actual intention behind it as the notorious how. Hi, how are you? If they really did want to invite you for a coffee, they would have made a day. 2. Your colleague from Eastern Europe needs you to do something for him but surprises you with the way he asks. This simply bark a request at you which you find a little surprising and possibly even a little rude. Your Eastern European colleague was actually making a polite request in what they thought was a perfectly polite manner. If you take a closer look at what a polite request is in English, a simple sentence tends to contain at least two pleases or one to could use and would use, and sometimes even opens with a phrase would you like to, when clearly this is not the case. 3. For non-Americans, when your American colleague wanted a warm-up of their coffee, they did not mean for you to reheat the said leftovers of the bottom of their cup, but in fact, a refill. It is this as simple as an American expression. Language is a phenomenon that is very deeply set in our culture, our roots, and our background. We tend to always come back to the ways of expressing our thoughts that is most natural to us.